Hi, I've got a paper to read to you here, and I look forward to discussion at the symposium. Cage's chart of tree provides parameters for exploring the sonic affordances of plants, deploying the I Ching to pre-structure the 8-minute performance. Individual actions are indeterminate, he says. Using a stopwatch, the soloist improvises, clarifying the time structure by means of the instruments. This improvisation is the performance. In this paper, I describe how messy plant-human interactions undo conventional assumptions about performance, aesthetics being undone by ecology, virtuality by biology. I replace the term performer with operator, since the concept of performance assumes an irrelevant acquisition and display of expertise. And seeking to avoid anthropocentrism about what plants do, I acknowledge that plants are operated, not performed. My desire is to understand how the operator works in Child of Tree. I make 3 claims about Child of Tree. Number 1, there is no unbroken line from preparation to performance, sublimating initial work within later work, engagement being neither linear nor causal. Number 2, skill is not accumulated iteratively and stored in the instruments or the operator's body for future performances, there being no straightforward equivalent to technical or artistic investment from one performance to the next, though learning does occur. And number 3, problems of instrumental use are not permanently solved during a performance. Combined into a single claim, working through Child of Tree is messier, in Bateson's sense, than performing Schubert's Der Lindenbaum. Child of Tree's ecological significance, as pertinent today given the acceleration of environmental change as it was following the 1970s OPEC oil crisis, is its dissolution of the boundary between preparation and performance, which models an ecologically sensitive relation between humanity and the environment. As the quip goes, there is no planet B. The handwritten score is deliberately circuitous and confusing. There are almost as many words and phrases crossed out as not. Long lines indicate leaps from one place on the page to another, forming a network, not a narrative. Parentheses and insertions above script lines indicate breaks in revisions, and 5 of the 8 pages have even had their numbering changed. These devices, at once literary and visual, displace the score in the mainstream sense of a mnemonic of intentions and directions, in favor of a materiality that stubbornly resists being read as a directive and that delays performance. It gets the operator looking at what she has in her hands, not looking beyond the score towards the music. For what matters ecologically is here and now, not over there and later. As part of the instrumentation then, the score cannot be set aside when preparation ends and performance starts. Cage writes that no conventionally pitched instruments are to be used and none made of animal or metal skins. The 10 instruments include at least 1 pod rattle from a Mexican poinciana tree and at least 1 amplified cactus, live or dry, having, as he says, a solid body and spines which are relatively free of other spines, so that when one spine is plucked by means of a needle or toothpick, a single pitched sound issues. Other instruments are claves-like. The plants are still growing or decaying and are literally uncontrollable. Some may be fragile and may materially evolve by the next performance. The instrument, Cage says, is unfamiliar. If you become very familiar with a piece of cactus, it shortly disintegrates, and you have to replace it with another you don't know. So the whole thing remains fascinating and free of your memory as a matter of course. The key word here is fascinating, which I gloss with an earlier statement from Cage about fascination, where he reminds us of the network linking noise and listening. Wherever we are, what we hear is mostly noise. When we ignore it, it disturbs us. When we listen to it, we find it fascinating. The direction of travel within the 6 clauses is from agency to ecology. Linking Cage's statements suggests that listening is not really a way of overcoming not knowing, the basic phenomenology of human-plant interaction, but a way of inhabiting the environment, of being fascinated with the world sounding. In Child of Tree, the inverted commas around instruments in the opening sentence and the crossed out heading instruments clarify the stakes. To become a musical instrument is to become mediated and unnatural, but no less fascinating for that. Having displaced the term performer with operator, I also displaced the term instrument with tool, thereby acknowledging the extractive nature of instrumental action. Sound must result. In mainstream performance, expertise assumes ergonomic efficacy. Instruments exist at an intersection of material, social, and cultural worlds where they are as much constructed and fashioned by the force of minds, cultures, societies, and histories as axes, saws, drills, chisels, machines, and the ecology of wood. Playing pianos is biologically unnatural, but 10,000 hours of practice acclimatizes operator and instrument. Matching biological sensorium to instrumental affordances, knowing the ideal height of piano stools, shaping sound to fulfill the demands of Der Lindenbaum, understanding the relation between physical posture and musical register, conceiving musical tone metaphorically. Assumptions about acclimatization are irrelevant to Child of Tree, where it is the instruments themselves which control events, so that a player's efforts to produce desired effects are almost certainly frustrated, though frustration is unhelpful as it belongs to a Schubertian ideology. Technologically speaking, while pianos extend the operator's reach into the world, plants are outside her grasp, proceeding by modular development, Michael Marder says, multiplying extensions without adding a new vital function. Their vital energy comes from their own self-regulation, even when they're decaying. So admitting that they are operated, not performed, remains somewhat anthropocentric. They operate themselves. Lacking intentionality, they slow down and potentially undo the intentionality of the operator's engagement. The rhythm belongs to the instruments and not to you, says Cage. Thus, while Schubert's pianists sit at any instrument and produce the same sound, and will produce the same sound tomorrow, every cactus is doubly different. Different to other cacti and different to itself tomorrow. Subject to weather, room humidity, oily human hands, and amplification, they are material obstacles to the routines of idealization, rational comprehension, and conceptualization. While pianists can fulfill intentions with relative biological certainty and without appreciable psychological resistance, plants have to be coaxed into instrumental life with care and sensitivity. Their network of affordances for action, the climate in which they thrive, emerges slowly. Even by Cage's standards, Child of Tree's mixture of choice, decision, chance, and improvisation embodies a complex indeterminacy. Given the material resistance of plants and the tempo of their being, working through a performance is unlikely to transform straightforwardly over time into skill and then into expertise. There are experts, of course. Think of David Tudor and Chris Schultes, to name two men. But the point is that skills have a weak relation to the operator's performative habitus and her bodily training. They are not the hard skills rationalized in mainstream theories of musical performance. The issue is how the operator co-inhabits the environment with the plants, for Child of Tree requires her to start again each time she performs. Longitudinally speaking, we could claim that repetition with difference affords growth, dispersing the three stages of skill acquisition, while tactile and tactful actions afford the emergence of soft skills like adaptability, resilience, perseverance, and reflection, all the better for making Cage's operator a more ecologically sensitive citizen for the future. However, on a smaller time scale, we still need to ask, given that any two performances on YouTube are sufficiently different to require distinct descriptions, what mode of work aids the operator's tactile engagement with the plants, and what remains after engagement? This question seems absurd, given that research into skill acquisition, transfer effects, and music's impact on neuroplasticity focuses on Schubert, not Cage. But consider Cage's ecological position. Nature is not a separation of water from air, or of the sky from the earth, etc., but a working together, or a playing together of those elements. That is what we call ecology. Music, as I conceive it, is ecological. You could go further and say that it is ecology. For Cage, then, work sits squarely alongside nature. Thus, working together with physical matter, hoping not only to learn something about plants, but also to learn from them, and perhaps even with them, the operator needs to act more carefully and gently than in Schubert. Force exerted on the plants and sonic performativity are inversely correlated. Less is more. Work requires relaxation, seeking, Schultes says, to coexist rather than control. This is congruent with the fact that the rhythms of growth within and outside of us diverge from those of human consciousness. Change is signaled by rustling, not writing, and a crossed out note on the final page whispers that there is no need for a great deal of activity. Here, in this quiet withdrawal, we encounter the ecological heart of Child of Tree. This is the clearing where there is nothing more difficult for us than to linger patiently in the here, without as much fantasizing about something that lies over there, where we are not. What the operator requires is not Kant's brooding indecision from which reason is violently torn, but the refusal of a certain mode of work. Not laziness, but tact. Not sudden epiphanies, but slow persistence. Not the implementation of the work, but the working through of implementation. There may be delays here while the plants do their thing over there, but the proper way to engage Child of Tree is to acknowledge that there are no aesthetic emergencies. Indeed, this maxim suggests not that artistic engagement is not urgent, but that the emergency is situated elsewhere, in ecology. The instrumental setup of Child of Tree affords its operator a way of being in the world that is ecologically sensitive. To wit, number one, there is no meaningful distinction between preparation and performance. There is one planet. Number two, mess and indeterminacy are ontological concepts and should not be used for value judgments. There is one life. And number three, regarding the Heideggerian phrase being in the world, working through Child of Tree is effectively a disclosure of truth, aletheia, not as a consequence of action, but in the very materiality of engagement. The operator has one body. So there are no conclusions, only open indeterminacy, music being one mode of openness to the world. One planet, one life, one body, the urgency of which I take to mean that strictly musical questions are no longer serious questions, unless they are ecologically grounded, biologically embedded, and responsive to human and environmental resistance. Working sonically, Cage murmurs, only sometimes requires agency. Thank you very much, and see you soon.